In the first 10 seconds, I want you to ask yourself this question. What kind of man walks through the world completely unaffected by attraction, validation, or rejection from women? Not angry, not bitter, not heartbroken, just indifferent. While most men are driven, distracted, and emotionally hijacked by desire, this man moves differently, calm, focused, unreachable, and that indifference is not weakness. It's power. Today, we're breaking down the psychology of men who don't care about girls, and why their mindset quietly terrifies the world around them. Most people misunderstand these men. They assume something is wrong with them, that they're broken, damaged, or secretly lonely. Society has trained us to believe that a man's worth is proven through romantic success. If he's not chasing, craving, or proving himself, people panic. But psychology tells a very different story. Men who genuinely don't care about girls aren't empty. They're insulated. Their emotional center of gravity doesn't live outside of them. And that changes everything. The first thing to understand is that indifference is rarely accidental. It is usually built. Most of these men were not born detached. They learned detachment the hard way, through rejection, betrayal, emotional burnout, or watching others destroy themselves chasing validation. They slowly rewired their priorities. Over time, their brain learned a brutal lesson. Emotional investment without purpose is a liability. Once that lesson sets in, attraction stops being a driving force and becomes background noise. Psychologically, desire is a powerful manipulator. It hijacks attention, disrupts focus, and creates emotional dependency. The average man is constantly negotiating his identity around how he's perceived by women, how he looks, how he talks, how he performs. Men who don't care step outside that negotiation entirely. They stop performing, and when performance ends, control begins. These men don't feel the need to impress. They don't chase approval. Their dopamine system isn't wired to external validation. Instead, it's wired to progress, mastery, and internal standards. That makes them dangerous, not in a violent sense, but in a psychological one. You cannot manipulate someone who doesn't need you. You cannot control someone who doesn't crave your reaction. There's also a darker layer most people miss. Many of these men learned emotional self-reliance early. When a man realizes no one is coming to save him, comfort him, or validate his struggles, he either collapses or he hardens. The men we're talking about chose the second option. They built emotional walls so thick that attraction simply couldn't penetrate unless it served a purpose. Love, to them, is not a fantasy. It's a transaction of energy, time, and attention. And if the cost is too high, they walk away without hesitation. This detachment creates a strange paradox. The less they care, the more magnetic they become. Human psychology is wired to chase what feels scarce and emotionally unavailable. When a man doesn't seek attention, people project value onto him. They assume confidence, status, or hidden depth. In reality, it's simpler than that. He just isn't hungry, and hunger is visible. Another key trait of these men is clarity. When attraction no longer clouds judgment, perception sharpens. They see red flags instantly. They recognize emotional manipulation. They sense instability before it explodes. Because they aren't emotionally invested, they're not blinded by hope. Hope, after all, is one of the most dangerous psychological drugs. It convinces people to ignore reality. These men don't operate on hope. They operate on evidence. It's important to understand that not caring doesn't mean hating. Indifference is not resentment. Resentment is still attachment. These men aren't angry at women. They're simply uninterested in centering their lives around them. That distinction matters. Anger can be exploited. Indifference cannot. When someone cannot provoke an emotional response from you, they lose leverage. From a neurological perspective, This mindset is reinforced by delayed gratification. Men who don't care about girls often redirect sexual and emotional energy into long-term goals: wealth, physical dominance, skill acquisition, or intellectual mastery. Over time, the brain learns to associate satisfaction with progress rather than pleasure. This rewiring creates emotional discipline most people never develop. And here's the uncomfortable truth: society needs men who are distracted. Distracted men are predictable. They buy more, chase more, compete more, obsess more. Men who don't care disrupt that system. They are harder to sell to, harder to shame, harder to control. That's why they're often labeled as cold, arrogant, or emotionally unavailable. Those labels are defense mechanisms from a world that doesn't know how to deal with someone who doesn't need its approval. These men also understand something deeply unsettling about relationships. Most emotional suffering doesn't come from loss, it comes from attachment. The tighter the attachment, the greater the pain when reality shifts. By loosening attachment, they reduce suffering. This doesn't make them heartless. It makes them strategic. They feel emotions, but emotions don't own them. Another psychological trait is self-contained identity. Their sense of self isn't built on being desired. It's built on competence. When a man knows exactly who he is and what he's capable of, attraction becomes optional, not essential. Rejection doesn't threaten his identity. Attention doesn't inflate it. He remains stable in both absence and abundance. Ironically, this emotional neutrality often attracts intense interest. People sense when someone is unmovable. When you can't read someone's emotional needs, curiosity spikes. But these men rarely mistake interest for value. They don't confuse desire with compatibility. That's a level of discernment that only comes from emotional control. There is, however, a shadow side. Extreme detachment can turn into isolation if left unchecked. Some men use indifference as armor to avoid vulnerability altogether. They confuse emotional control with emotional suppression. True strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's the ability to feel without being ruled by it. The healthiest version of this psychology is not coldness, but selectiveness. Men who don't care about girls choose intentionally. If they commit, it's not because they're lonely or desperate. It's because the connection adds value, peace, or alignment to their life. And that makes their commitment rare and powerful. So, why does this psychology feel so intimidating? Because it flips the usual power dynamic. When a man doesn't need validation, he becomes unpredictable. When he doesn't chase, he controls his time. When he can walk away without emotional collapse, he holds leverage without trying to. In the end, this isn't about rejecting relationships or connection. It's about reclaiming agency. Men who don't care about girls aren't running from intimacy. They're refusing to be owned by it. They understand that their purpose comes first, and everything else must earn its place. And here's the final truth most people won't tell you. The moment a man stops needing to be chosen is the moment he chooses himself. And once that happens, the world no longer decides his worth. He does.